Hi, my name is Stephanie Volker, and today I will be sharing my needs assessment presentation on foster youth aging out in Maricopa County. Today I'd like to identify the purpose of the needs assessment assignment, discuss data collection techniques and outcomes, review the results of my interview and key findings within the data, identify recommendations for intervention and a plan of action, and talk a little bit about my personal experience with the needs assessment. So the purpose of the needs assessment assignment was to identify what was happening within youth aging out of the foster care system as far as poor transition outcomes, which I will talk about in the next few slides. So I wanted to do this through assessing gaps in service provision, identifying major barriers, finding out what types of services were currently available, and finding out the current needs of youth aging out of the foster care system. Some current concerns and major issues outlined by the literature and current research that youth aging out of the foster care system are at a higher risk for poor transition outcomes. So things like teenage pregnancy and early parenting ages, struggling to maintain stable employment and housing, an increased likelihood of their own children being in foster care, and also their ability to obtain a high school diploma or GED. Through the literature review for this assignment, I identified some of the recurring themes that were happening in the literature. A lot of the literature stated that there were a lot of problems in poor transition outcomes, and there was very few pieces of literature that stated that these programs were working or what the efficacy was. And that was really surprising to see that many programs were not being monitored, just implemented. And still these poor transition outcomes were happening. So there was a little bit of disconnect in the data of things aren't working, but we're not measuring why they're not working. After reviewing the literature, I selected 4 potential interview sites based on the services that they provided to older foster youth aging out of the foster care system. Each of these 4 sites offered an independent living skills training program, support with independent living skills, or funding to assist with independent living skills needs. 2 of the sites responded, and I was able to interview 3 representatives from the 2 agencies. Arizona's Children's Association offers an independent living skills training program, and ETV is educational training voucher offered by Foster Care to Success, which funds post-secondary and vocational training for youth aging out of the foster care system. My interviewees were 2 females and 1 male, all with liberal arts degrees and over 5 years experience in social services. They had been at their respective agencies for 3 years or less. Below are some of the interview questions that I asked. I was curious about what they felt foster youth's strengths were, what their role in the agency, how that affected effective service provision, and concerns that foster youth were sharing with them. I came up with 5 themes through the interviews, and some of them mirrored the literature that I found, and others were quite surprising. So the first theme was that youth have insufficient support systems, and this was one of the major themes in the literature review, so I was not surprised to hear that come up in interviews. The interviewees did mention that a lot of the mentoring programs ended early, about the same time that youth are aging out of the foster care system, and that youth who don't have these informal supports built kind of lost everything when the rest of the formal services fell out. And we'll talk more about that. Services often being inaccessible. So youth are moving to various out-of-home placements very frequently and may lose contact with formal supports or informal supports that they had built rapport with. Service goals being unattainable, which was surprising. That I feel like this may be specific to Arizona, but I couldn't find any research to back this up, stating that youth are being pushed towards programs that already have funding to send them to college, when college may not be appropriate because of lack of previous education, not having enough credits, not having a high school diploma, things of that nature. The Fourth theme, loss of resources. So when youth age out of the foster care system, these services also go. So mentoring, funding, many different formal supports are being removed right when they're also losing the support of their former legal guardian. And there are no replacements for youth in Arizona over the age of 21 to replace the funding or support systems they once had. The fifth theme was that foster youth are resilient. And this made me really happy to hear because, despite there being poor transition outcomes or poor coping skills, these youth are coming back and they do want to try. These are the recommendations that I had, was to start independent living skills training earlier, to identify the needs at a younger age and what their interests are. So maybe vocational training is for them and not college. Evaluation of current programs, standardizing age limit for services nationally, extending the age limit for mentor programs to carry youth into more later years of that transition age, maybe 25 or 26, and to allocate current funding from current programs for housing to kind of remove the stressor from, after living in a group home, where do I go? So these youth would be able to focus more on their education or skill building. I would like to continue to initiate contact with the Department of Child Safety to share this information, as they are the legal guardians for these youth. I did end up meeting with a few of the initial interviewees to talk about this and how they feel their organizations would receive this information. And I'd like to do an additional needs assessment and focus more on where the money is coming from. I feel that what worked was that I had a lot of experience previously working with foster youth and had a lot of really good working relationships with these programs. I had worked with them closely for the past 3 years. In the future, I would like to expand my research focus and do a more macro view of what is happening, that we have all of these programs and all of this funding, but still having extensive poor transition outcomes. Overall, it was a positive learning experience. I learned more about how to make an impact within this population and the large scope, national funding, and honestly how underutilized the youth's opinions are here. Not once did anybody say, hey, let's turn to the foster youth and find out. And the interviewees did identify some youth advisory boards that were helpful to them, but other than that, there are very few youth-led groups talking about services. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, I can be reached at srobbins1@asu.edu. Thank you.